We're so thrilled that you're here with us today. Again, a few helpful notes in case you've never attended an event on Zoom. Each session is being recorded and will be posted on UCR's Learning Management System. If you would like closed captions for this session, please click on the Show Closed Caption button at the bottom of your screen. While we can use a chat feature, you can also submit your questions using the Q&A feature as well. I'm going to go ahead and give it another minute or two to have everyone join. But as we're waiting, go ahead and let me know in the chat where you're listening from today so that we can go ahead and get started. All right, I see that we have some few chats coming in. Let's see where y'all are coming from. All right, we're on campus, UCR, Dana Point. Ooh, nice. Ooh, Career Center. Hi, Pat. Marilyn's here from Oregon. All right. So as always, please be mindful of the UCR principles of community. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker, Jacob Ravenscraft. Jacob Ravenscraft is a dean in student services at Cal Baptist University. Jacob has over a decade of leadership experience and is passionate about developing leaders and teams so they can be healthy multipliers for effectiveness and success. Jacob is a dynamic and intuitive leader with a strong passion for developing leaders and teams. He uses his Working Genius leadership certification to coach people towards organizational health and strategic leadership. Again, we're very excited to have you, Jacob, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
All right. Well, hey, I'm excited to be a part of the UCR conference, and man, I love being a part of things like this. Anything that has to do with helping people work with others to be effective, and so anything that's team oriented, leadership oriented, man, I just love being able to contribute and help in the art of getting things done. So when it comes to work and when it comes to being effective and being a team player and being a leader, man, I'm a student of that. That's something that I want to be a learner for a lifetime, and I want to be teachable. And so I love always the opportunity to be able to be a part of maybe contributing toward someone being effective, maybe increasing quality when it comes to leadership, or how you are contributing to the team and contributing toward the art of getting things done. So today's a privilege for me. I'm honored. I'm grateful to be a part of this. And today, man, I really want to just be able to hopefully contribute to just some positive traits to fighting 5 dysfunctions of a team. And so as I kind of consider, some of these things, I love just here. I want to let me make sure I post this or share the screen here. Oh, geez. But before I share that, I'd love to get a little bit of feedback from you guys. When you think about dysfunctions of a team, or when you think about a team not working together well, I just want to hear from you, hear from the audience, hear from how you're showing up. I think all of us are connected to some team in some way, or you have experience being a part of a team in your life. But what I would love to hear from you guys real quick is just give me one thing. What's an example or a reason why a team does not function well together? A team doesn't work well together. Yeah. Okay. It's coming in. Communication, lack of some things, lack of some trust, lack of some communication. Absolutely. I'm loving it. Lack of leadership, different mindsets. Okay, that's great. Yeah. Different personalities. Okay, so we're wired differently. Ooh, yeah, it's that micromanaging, that control is coming in. Team dynamics, 100% different. Yeah, working or learning styles, culture. Ooh, yes. Absolutely. Okay. I love it. No clear goals. Yeah. Disorganization. These are great. Yeah. Keep them coming. So that's exciting. So I'm excited to just jump into this. This session, what we're trying to do is focusing in on the first three parts of the five dysfunctions of a team. And so building trust, mastering conflict, and reaching commitment. And so that middle one is kind of the one that is often the surprise. The word conflict is something that we tend to avoid. And so we'll address that in a little bit, but these are the three things I'm hoping that you can walk away with at least one simple tool that you could apply in each one of these areas. So when it comes to building trust, I want you to be able to take away one small thing that you can take with you into a team environment and say, I can apply this and help build trust. I can help build trust with my colleagues, with my staff, with my teammates. When it comes to mastering conflict, I am hoping that at the end of the session, you can leave with a tool and say, man, I can actually practice what it means to have like good conflict that is effective. And then reaching commitment. You can walk away today. That's the goal, that you can walk away with one thing at least where you can say, hey, I can work on commitment. So Patrick Lencioni has a model as well as a book that I highly recommend, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And this part of his pyramid here just shows that, man, there can be some negatives from not having trust. So these are all showing, hey, that when there can be an absence of trust, it's going to lead to a fear of commitment, which is going to lead to a lack of commitment. Sorry, fear of conflict, which is going to lead to a lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and then inattention to results. And so some of those things that you guys already said in the chat, there's some obvious things there. So I want to get to what just to extend this, like if we don't have trust, it's in invulnerability. If we have a fear of conflict, it's going to equal artificial harmony. If we have a lack of commitment, it's going to lead to ambiguity. If there's no accountability ever, we're going to have low standards. And then if we're not paying attention to results, it's just going to lead to different people having status and ego. So those are helpful things to see where those lead, and why we are going to dig into those first three parts of this pyramid. So let's just jump into it and talk about building trust. There's a few different kinds of trust. If you see here in this first slide, there's a fear-based trust. So you can have like a trust that actually comes from fear, and you have to be able to trust that things are going to get done. You have to you're functioning out of a place of fear, and there's a fear-based trust. Now, the second one is the one that most people in work environments are operating out of. They're operating out of this predictive trust, because you've worked with someone so long, you can almost anticipate, you can predict, you can almost like read their mind about what they're going to do because you've been around them for so long, this predictive trust. But then there's this vulnerable trust that kind of takes us to a different level. And just to summarize this idea of vulnerable trust, it's really comfortable being transparent. I think when we get to vulnerable trust, it's really helpful to kind of see some examples. I think in the work context, something that's so hard to see regularly is just basic honesty. I have an example from a couple weeks ago where myself in my role as a boss to a colleague, have you ever done this where I totally missed an email that I needed to forward to get an answer to? And it was a week later, and I went to my colleague and I said, hey, I completely forgot to like forward that email to get an answer for you. I just forwarded it this morning. Like, my apologies. Will you forgive me? And it was something so simple. And it was like not easy to do. It was actually like I had to swallow my pride a little bit and go just admit, hey, I totally forgot to forward that. And that was just one of these examples of, hey, we got to own our mistakes, acknowledge weaknesses, we got to ask for help. And so for me, that was one of this example of vulnerable trust where I had to step into owning a mistake. And I had to go to my colleague, who I'm their boss, and just say, hey, I completely missed that email and did not forward it. So really it can be as simple as, just having to go to someone and just be honest and say, hey, I messed this up, or I forgot this small things, however big or however small, will you forgive me? And sometimes I think we find ourselves trying to come up with different reasons or excuses. That's a temptation for me, and twist it and spin it and make it sound like it wasn't, my own mistake, but for me, in that example, it was. I think when we begin to practice vulnerable trust, these ideas of owning mistakes, acknowledging weaknesses and asking for help, it leads us into a place where we are now building a true foundation of trust that moves from predictive trust or maybe fear-based trust to vulnerable trust. A couple more examples just to get you thinking about, what does this look like in my work context? What does this look like in my team context? I think when you have maybe team meetings, whether they're, once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, when you're doing big team meetings where you're sort of like, hey, we're going to take a step back and we're going to work on our team. How's our team doing? When you're going to kind of be up in the clouds and you're going to, really ask yourself, like, how are we doing as a team? Those are big meetings, and those are big opportunities for you guys to build trust. And so with my team, I try to facilitate different team building exercises that are going to truly lead to building vulnerable trust. One of the things that I like to acknowledge is different unhealthy leadership qualities. So I had a time with my team this past year where I just said, hey, one of the defaults that I can fall into is being maybe a bulldozer leader, because I just want to get to the to-do list and I just want to get stuff done. And so to fight that, I need to be able to pause and implement something that's going to allow people to speak into how they're doing. So sometimes in those meetings, and just to implement something really simple is, hey, let's pause and just say, hey, what's your high and low of your week? And just have literally something as simple as everyone just saying, hey, this is a high of my week, this is a low of my week, this is kind of where I'm at. And it was a step of checking in before jumping into just a to-do list. And that's a way that you can build vulnerable trust. And just even as a leader, trying to recognize, hey, this is a tendency for me, but I want to build a healthy culture, and here's the step that I'm taking. In a brainstorm meeting a month ago, I was able to identify and just be self-aware, hey, I am not the best sort of inventor of ideas out of nothing. And so I have a couple of team members on my team who are good at that. And I just said, hey, I'm going to hand the marker over to you, and I would love you to lead us in a little bit of a brainstorm. Can you help us sort of think of some things that we haven't thought of? Take us to a place that we haven't thought of. The other day I had my assistant or I kept realizing that in my staff meeting, I was forgetting giving these announcements. And finally I had to say, I'm going to keep forgetting this, and ask my assistant, hey, can you hand me like a list of the things that I need to share before the meeting? And so she was like, yeah, absolutely, I would love to. So thinking through some of these things that can build a vulnerable trust, and taking, what does it look like? It looks like owning mistakes, acknowledging weaknesses, and asking for help. But it requires abandoning pride. It requires facing fears and a courage to try some new things. When we get to really looking at results from an absence of vulnerable trust, if we are only ever living in fear-based trust, or we're only ever living in this predictive trust, and predictive trust can be effective. But if we only ever live there, some of the results that we can get to is we can have teammates who are cynical. We can have teammates who are cynical because they truly haven't developed a real sense of trust with their teammates or with their whole team. You can actually have people who are suspicious of particular leadership styles, or maybe it's personality and behavior because they just haven't actually built that vulnerable trust with their team or their boss, or their colleagues. So the last one is critical. If we don't have vulnerable trust, we can be cynical, we can be suspicious, and we can also be critical. And so we got to be careful of those things. And so that's just helpful to sort of build, man, what does it look like to build this foundation of vulnerable trust? And how do we move to really trusting our teammates and showing up as an ideal team player? One of the things that I think is helpful is, man, you have whoever you're working with has a certain set of strengths, certain set of abilities that that they're really gifted in. And so they want to be delegated those responsibilities. And so learning maybe a personality style or a leadership style or leadership strengths is going to serve you well, because any opportunity that you get to delegate those responsibilities is going to be really helpful, because you're going to empower them and begin to step into vulnerable trust. One of my favorite tools that I talk about often and have done a couple sessions with some other people here on campus is Working Genius. And I love the Working Genius because I learn what my team's working geniuses are, what brings them joy, energy, and fulfillment. And if ever I have an opportunity to tap into someone's working genius, I begin to build vulnerable trust with them, because I'm not only just recognizing that they have this skill, they have this genius, it brings them joy, but then I'm giving them the opportunity to do it. So the other day we were having a full staff meeting, and I didn't have enough time to go get some of the snacks and some of the food and help set up the room. And I looked at my team, and I looked at their working genius. I said, who has this working genius of stepping into these sort of opportunities? And I saw two of my team members had it. And I said, I'm calling them up. I'm giving them this. But what's funny about that is the person that I would normally call wasn't on the list for having those working geniuses. And I realized I need to change who I'm asking to do this, so that I can really set this person up for success, instead of this person that really it's a work in frustration for them. And so that was a cool moment for me to be able to say, hey, I want to tap into the right people for this specific ask. So we don't want to fall into building a team and a culture of people who are cynical, suspicious, and critical. We really want to build that vulnerable trust. And so here it is, really owning mistakes, acknowledging weaknesses, and asking people for help. I think as a boss, when I step into asking the people who report to me for help with different things, it's funny. The opposite happens. You kind of almost feel maybe insecure that you have to ask for help as a boss, but really most people feel honored and privileged, and you build that step of vulnerable trust with them. So those are some simple examples. And now as we look at this foundation of vulnerable trust, we have this, okay, it's not an absence of trust. If we truly have trust, we start to go first in that sharing. We're open with each other, and we can maybe start practicing some of those simple tools, as simple as, hey, what's your high and low for the week before a meeting? So let's move into mastering conflict. This is that topic that I truly think is just so rare, that not a lot of people are talking about. What does it look like to master conflict, and how can conflict actually be helpful when it comes to a team and building a team, mastering conflict. Now, the most important part with conflict is that you have to have trust. So remember, the pyramid is building off the foundation. So if you don't have trust and you try to master conflict, that's going to blow up in your face, and your team is going to just, lose more trust. But when it comes to conflict, what does it look like to actually master conflict? Well, really, there's this idea of ideological conflict. And ideological conflict is something that is productive, and it's something that is constructive. Okay. It requires trust, right? But productive ideological conflict, it revolves around important decisions that must be made. And the last thing is that it's not about the who is right, but it's about what is right. And it's about starting the meeting in the right place. And so ideological conflict is fascinating because it's this willingness to disagree, even passionately, when necessary, around important issues and decisions that must be made. And of course, again, it requires trust, and it's not about the who is right, it's about the what is right. And so one of my favorite things is sharing this conflict continuum with people when it comes to teams making decisions. And as you saw at the beginning of the Patrick Lencioni 5 Dysfunctions of a Team pyramid, you saw that if you have an absence of trust, you're going to live in artificial harmony. And this is where most teams and most colleagues and most workers live, because this is really the place that is sort of the safe place. But the reality is it's this like false sense of trust. It's this artificial harmony in a team because you haven't really stepped into the vulnerable trust foundation. And so looking at this continuum, if you see on the right side, you see mean-spirited personal attacks. Mean-spirited personal attacks. And that is what I think most people think of when they think of conflict. But if you think of conflict at a wider lens, you can actually begin to see, wait, some conflict is good, right? Civil discourse, being able to have conversations about ideas and being able to disagree about ideas. When you get all the way over to the mean-spirited personal attacks, that's absolutely unhealthy. That's not the kind of conflict that we're looking at. But what happens is any conflict somehow jumps to mean-spirited personal attacks because we don't know how to function on a continuum of conflict and have conflict around ideas. Now that's the danger, right? Because when you don't have conflict around ideas, you begin to have conflict with people. And that's why you need to be able to practice this skill and this tool of having conflict around ideas. So if you see the left side, there's constructive conflict, right? There's conflict that can be constructive, and you're trying to get to that ideal conflict point where you get to the best answer. You're looking for the best answer. You're looking for a breakthrough to get to the topics and the decisions that are most important. And it's really helpful even just to have this continuum to understand, hey, we're not trying to take things personal, because when our ideas move to identity, that's when we get over to the mean-spirited personal attacks. And so this conflict continuum is just so helpful. Man, conflict without trust is politics. Conflict without trust, it's just politics. And it's an attempt to manipulate others in order to win an argument, regardless of the truth. And so you begin to not care about the truth, or you begin to not actually care about the right decision when you are having conflict without trust. You just step into a landscape of politics. And so you got to be obviously really careful with having conflict without trust. And that's why trust is so important to build and to grow. One of my favorite exercises with my team, and again, you have to have trust, but this is also you have to have a certain amount of trust to do these exercises, is to rate where you might be on the ideal team player scale. This is another Lencioni tool. He talks about being ideal team player, hungry, humble, smart. And this is something I've done with many teams, is also my own team, and just sort of self-rank where I think I am, what's my strongest characteristic of the ideal team player, am I and then what's my weakest one. So my weakest one, maybe my weakest one is humble, and so I'm like, hey, that's my weakest one. And then I think I'm pretty hungry, and think my strongest one is people smarts, like a EQ. And you have that rating, and then you kind of explain why you think that, and then you have your team kind of speak into that and even offer some encouragement. When you do things like that, you begin to step into a vulnerable trust that creates a really healthy communication climate, where you can operate to move toward this ideal conflict point. And so you begin to see results. You begin to see people make That's when you start making really good decisions as a team, because people aren't staying quiet, people aren't living in artificial harmony, but you begin to really step into that. Okay, we are now actually helping each other, and we're being more effective because of it. And so when leader sees these positive conflict happening, one of the best things to do is just say, hey, I want to pause real quick, and I just want to affirm this conflict. Like that is so affirming to the team to know, like, oh, this is okay. Like, we can disagree with each other. So literally last week, I have two different teams that are under me. And what was happening is we weren't communicating well. And so I had to set up a meeting of these two teams together in the same room. And I had to kind of facilitate a conversation about, hey, where are decisions being made for our student processes? And how do we need to communicate better and do something that's called cascade messaging? Basically, like, play the telephone game and make sure everyone knows what's happening. And so that was a meeting that absolutely had disagreement. It absolutely had it had conflict in it. And there were 3 different times during that meeting where I paused and I affirmed people who were disagreeing with each other. And I said, hey, I just want you to know this is good because you guys are disagreeing with ideas. You're not disagreeing with each other. You're disagreeing with the concepts and you're giving further perspective. You're not disagreeing with each other's identity and value. And so, well done. Let's keep going. And you could tell, like, it helped them know that what they were sharing, was worth it because we were moving toward the right answer, the right ideas. It wasn't about who was right. It was about what was right. So that was really helpful. Another quick example was we started a meeting with my team and we started with an assumption, and we assumed that paid student workers to recruit to a student affairs initiative was the best way to do the recruiting. But then I had a team member who spoke up and said, wait a minute, I disagree. I think we're assuming that this is the best way. And now we're talking about how we're going to finish it. And we completely skipped wondering and asking the big questions about, is this actually the best way that we can recruit students to this initiative? And we all realized, oh my goodness, we skipped an entire step. You are right. And she stepped into conflict and disagreed with me, the boss. I was the one who made the assumption. And because we had trust and because I was able to think about what is right, not who is right, it wasn't about if I was right, it was about what is right. I was able to say, wow, that's a really good point. You're right. We need to go backwards and we need to ask the right question and we need to start in the right spot. And the funny thing is after we did that, we did not land in the same place. We came up with a bunch of other ideas and ways to execute our student affairs initiatives that had nothing to do with paid student workers. And so that was another helpful example of positive results from stepping into conflict. So there's this phrase, right? Mining for conflict, asking questions. When you have trust, you have people who start going first. They're stepping into vulnerable trust, and you can practice conflict and you can even mine for conflict. And that can lead to really, really good results. So I love this quote. It's the idea I mentioned earlier. When people fail to be honest with one another about an issue that they disagree on, their disagreement around that issue festers and ferments over time until it transforms into frustration and bitterness around that person. And so that's why practicing healthy conflict is so good, because now you have conflict around ideas instead of conflict with people. So that's one of my favorite quotes. So that's some practices and some helpful examples and hopefully some really simple tools when it comes to practicing conflict. So let's step into reaching commitment. Man, commitment is hard. It's hard to get people to commit to things. And as you are picking up, right, with this pyramid, you gotta have trust to build that trust, and then you got to start to, right, master that conflict and actually step into conflict and really practice this concept of, right, disagreeing with ideas so you don't disagree with people. And then you get to commitment. How do you get people to commit? What I see so often when it comes to higher education, specifically higher education, is that that people are asked to commit to something after a decision is made. I mean, how much does that happen? You just get handed like, hey, we're gonna do this, but you weren't a part of the, decision process. And I think that that's tricky. And especially in higher education, man, it's a process culture. And so you're worried about liability. So there's a lot of decisions made from a low risk perspective. You have a really low feedback loop, often no feedback loop at all. And so it's tricky when employees aren't getting a ton of feedback themselves, but you're asked to, write reports and deliver projects. And it actually moves you to focus on the how you do something, not the what you do. And so it's more about the process and having okay, follow the process, go through the steps. Here's a PDF for that. Just like go down the steps, and not worry about like what you're actually doing. And it actually kind of can breed, it can really like grow employees to become really defensive. And even you start copying people in emails, replying all to people, even when you're barely connected. And it's this really interesting thing that if something goes wrong, you just answers with a new procedure. And so when you're in the process culture of higher education, on that macro level, it could become really tricky because the corporate culture is making decisions that just can feed into those field organizations. And so whether you're, faculty or you're a different student affairs field organization office, sometimes that can be really frustrating because you're just asked to commit to things. But you can still control your team. And you can still build a culture around you of the people and the team members that you're working with. And so the question is, what kind of culture will you build? Will you build a culture of trust where you practice healthy conflict, where you can actually get to commitment? What will that look like for you? One of my favorite phrases when it comes to commitment is weigh in for buy-in. Weigh in for buy-in. That is one of my favorite phrases when it comes to getting to commitment, because I want my team to weigh in because I want their buy-in. And if I ever am frustrated with an employee because I see that they don't have ownership, they don't have buy-in, I have to first ask my question, did I give them a chance to have weigh-in? Did I give them a chance to have weigh-in? So the reality is that most people are generally reasonable and they can rally around an idea that wasn't their own as long as they know that they had a chance to weigh in. As long as they know that they had a chance to weigh in. So that's one of my favorite phrases and practices. At the end of the day, leaders, if you're the boss, you got to make a decision. But at least you took the opportunity to hear from your team, because you will be surprised. Often your team, don't underestimate your teammates and your colleagues and those who report to you, those who work around you, because they're probably, going to offer something that's going to contribute to your final decision. And you might still need to make a hard decision or a decision that doesn't line up with your team. But man, it is such a helpful key step to get weigh-in, in order to get buy-in. And so I always like to ask, what is your starting point for weigh-in? Did you kind of like make most of this decision and at the very, very end of it say, hey, you guys have any thoughts on this? Or did you start weigh-in at the very beginning of the process, maybe the middle and the end? I like these words: ideation, activation, and implementation. They come from the Working Genius model, and they describe the 3 stages of work. And the first stage is ideation, this idea of like really asking big questions and thinking of ideas to solve problems and deliver answers and solutions for to be effective for whatever you're tasked with. But then there's this second step of activating it and connecting people to the bigger picture and purpose and choosing the best decision. And lastly, implementation. What happens most of the time is people are asking for weigh-in at the implementation stage, at the very, very end of the process. A leader or someone on the team who's heading up a project will say, hey, what do you think of this? We basically have it done. And unfortunately, that's not true weigh-in. You haven't really asked the person to truly weigh into the project or to the decision or to the idea. You have to have weigh-in throughout the whole process to really equal the most effective buy-in. So that's why I like those words there and that referencing that tool, because it helps you move toward truly effective buy-in and ownership. So there's this yeah, I want to move here. I call it the agreement problem. The agreement problem is fascinating because it looks at the two different approaches to agreement: passive agreement versus specific agreement. And can I just get a show of hands? Is there anyone who's been in a meeting? You think you made a decision, you left the meeting, and then nothing happened. There was no follow through. And later on, thank you for some hands raised. Later on, right? Everyone's wondering, wait a minute, is that gonna get done? Or wait a minute, what's gonna happen? Or oh, we're past our deadline. Why didn't someone send that in? Yeah, this is called the agreement problem, right? This is passive agreement versus specific agreement. So there's some really helpful tips here. Passive agreement, you have no action items. No one wrote anything down, and you didn't go through a step. There was no work to support the idea. You didn't have weigh-in. You didn't have weigh-in, and so you didn't have buy-in. You didn't have ownership. And it results in you not promoting. If you don't have weigh-in, you're not going to promote that idea, and there's going to be really no effort to prevent it from dying. So how fascinating is that? If you have no weigh-in, most people end up quietly looking forward to it not working out, right? Like that's just the truth. If you don't have weigh-in, you're like, I don't really know about that. I'm not really bought into it. You're just kind of like quietly waiting for it to die, for it to not actually happen and work out. So that's another win in stepping into, asking for weigh-in for buy-in, and that requires specific agreement. You can't have passive agreement there. You have to have specific agreement, and specific agreement is going to be where you have to have action items. You have to literally go around the room and ask, hey, do we agree to this specific decision? And my favorite practice for this is silence means you disagree with me. And so if you're silent, you disagree. So we're going to go around the room and you have to speak up. Otherwise, and you have to tell me that you agree with this decision. Otherwise, I'm assuming that you disagree with all of this. And so that's a helpful practice. And then you have to list the action items. What are the action items and who is assigned to them? One of my favorite words in a team meeting before a team meeting ends is deputize. Who are you deputizing for what? Who are you deputizing for which particular part of this of this decision? Of whatever action items are listed on the board or in notes, whatever it is, man, who is deputized for this thing? Attach a name and attach a person to a specific action item before the meeting ends. Don't fall into passive agreement. Don't fall into the agreement problem. The second one here is receipts. So making sure that you send receipts as the leader, or you delegate it to an assistant or a particular person. Hey, will you send the receipt? Just yesterday, we had a big meeting, and there was a big decision made. We went around the room about a specific action items that we were going to take, again, for a student initiative and student affairs. And I was like, I am going to send a receipt. And so whatever your culture is, whatever tools you use, and so for this instance, it was an email. I sent an email that was a summary of the receipts with literal names attached to who is deputized for different parts of these recruiting initiatives. And that way it was sent. And so we had action items, we had weigh-in for buy-in, we had a receipt that was sent. Now the last one here is inspect what you expect. You got to inspect what you expect. And so even with those first three steps of weigh-in for buy-in, action items, and receipts, you still, I think as leaders, you still cannot just assume that it's all going to happen. You have to follow up and you have to inspect what you expect. And so that's just checking in on the receipt. It's Usually it's an in-person or a more informal, hey, how's that going? And, checking in, do you feel confident still in that? Like, do you feel like you were the right person to be deputized for it? Should we make a change? Have you talked to anyone on the team that maybe would be a better fit? But just inspecting what you expect. So specific agreements, really helpful, because before you leave a meeting, now you get buy-in. And when you have buy-in, you have ownership. And when you have ownership, then you don't have people just waiting for things to not work out. You want to be a part of the solution. You had buy-in. Now you actually want to contribute to being a success. So that's the agreement problem. So as you can see here, we're now moving up. We're building some momentum here. We've got trust. You have people who are being open. They're being vulnerable about their mistakes. You have bosses who are literally, recognizing that, they made a mistake. They're owning it. They're apologizing. Would you forgive me? You have, bosses and you have teammates recognizing weaknesses and saying, hey, that's not a strength for me. Is that something you can help me with? And so then you literally have a foundation built of trust. You have people practicing this. Then in meetings, people can actually be honest and they can practice this vulnerable trust, and they can start having conflict with ideas instead of people. And then now we're working on waiting for buy-in, and we're starting to have real true commitment to decisions that are being made. We're pushing for clarity and we're getting closure. And so those begin to build off each other. So I wanted to end with just some healthy habits, some really practical. I'm a try to be as practical of a leader, especially in these sessions. I want people to be able to walk away with really specific tools that help promote, fighting team dysfunction. I want to see teams be really effective and enjoy working together, and look forward to making progress in their work and getting work done. So the first thing that I love that's really helpful, that is one thing that I often use, is good gossip. And this this really contributes toward like team engagement. And under the good gossip, you'll see irrelevance. A lot of people struggle with this feeling irrelevant on a team. And so what good gossip does is this idea of just giving shout outs in team meetings, whether it's every other week or once a month, or once a week, whatever it may be, but it's a leader facilitating good gossip or asking their boss if they consider, hey, could we do good gossip? And really what this is, you got to lead by example, is shout outs. And so I'll try every week to at least have one shout out for a teammate and model what it looks like to give good gossip to someone on my team. Something that I noticed that I was really grateful for, just someone stepping up as a leader in a different way. And and a lot of times it can actually be saying, hey, this really built some vulnerable trust on our team because this person recognized, hey, they didn't do that and they want to grow. And I'm literally like so grateful for that. And now I'm inspired to own my mistakes more. Or it could be something really positive as a leader, like, someone really stepping up and delivering, or on a particular part of their role or whatever it may be. The other thing that I think really helps fight team dysfunction is, in a process culture like UCR, I am assuming that there is some sort of performance review process. So annually, right, there's a annual review done. I don't think that an annual review should only be discussed once a year. You should have check-ins along the way that builds confidence in teammates of where they're headed. Hey, are you headed farther away from this, or are you headed toward this? And what are the changes that we need to make? How can I come alongside you and make sure that you can make progress on this? Because the thing that's going to fight is immeasurement. When an employee feels like they don't have a metric for how they're doing in their role, and they don't understand if they are moving forward or they're moving backward toward their goals on their annual review, then that immeasurement is going to lead to employee unengagement. You're actually not helping that employee engage more and feel seen and be effective. You're actually helping that employee be less engaged. And I think as leaders and even as teammates, we want all the people that we work with to be engaged, right? We want them to be dialed in, right? Locked into the work, locked into a meeting. I think one of the most frustrating things in a meeting is if someone's on their phone, texting, unengaged, looking around the screen, looking over here, talking over here. Man, you want someone to be dialed in and engaged. And so that's something that contributes to it. The last one that I recommend is daily check-ins. I think this is helpful to understand everyone on a team, what they're working on. It's 5 minutes or less. The maximum this should be is 10 minutes. And it just say, hey, these are my top 3 things that I'm working on today. That's it. And it helps fight that person feeling anonymous in their job because they didn't talk to anyone who they work with for 3 days in a row. A daily check-in, gives recognition and acknowledgement to people that they're working, and that the work that they're doing even every day is contributing to the greater good. And so I don't feel anonymous anymore because I checked in with my team, and heard what they're doing. They heard what I'm working on today. And it was just a little bit of a boost. So it begins to change culture, and it's a healthy habit that can really fight team dysfunction. So wanted to make sure I know the session before went a little bit late. So I want to kind of pause there and just summarize this to close out, to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. At the beginning, we showed, right, if there's an absence of trust, invulnerability, right? We don't have people being vulnerable or really actually being open and feeling like they can be themselves. And if you have a fear of conflict, and people are scared of conflict, right? Because they don't have that perspective of a continuum, they're always worried that any conflict is going to lead to this really destructive thing in a team environment. And so you just end up living in artificial harmony, which is just a false reality. And if you have a lack of commitment and people aren't actually committing to the goals and the decisions, you're just living in this environment of ambiguity. And people avoid accountability, low standards, and then no one cares about results, just leads to ego. So when we really fight these things, man, you get to people going first, mining for conflict, pushing for clarity, and you really begin to have collective success. There's so much more in the top 2, accountability and results, which is why I wanted to just start with the first 3, so that this session could truly be accessible. So thank you. Hopefully there were some takeaways there in that, but I'd love to just open it up for some Q&A in the chat if anyone had any questions at all.
Thank you so much for that, Jacob. And as we wait for those questions that are going to come through the chat, I just want to know a couple of announcements before we close. We hope that you enjoyed your time with us today. And as you know, our goal is to keep the UCR Staff Conference 100% free to attend. And we couldn't do that without the generous support of our sponsors, UCR Staff Assembly, LEAD, UCR Human Resources, our Employee and Organizational Development Team, and Schools First Credit Union. And also, as a reminder, the conference will be uploaded to the UCR's Learning Management System in the following weeks. Quick reminders, we do have our first in-person session closing that's going to take place today, 3/27 at 2 p.m. Please RSVP. I'm going to go ahead and make the links available on the resource so that you all could RSVP. And I know that a lot of you asked about the Working Genius. If you sign up for our EOD listserv, that's how you can contact my team and Employee and Organizational Development. So please be sure to sign up for that listserv. And if there's any other questions that you have on the Working Genius assessment, I will be available to facilitate to that. We are doing a very, very slow rollout to the UCR campus. So again, thank you so much, Jacob. I'm going to go ahead and leave it up to you all to ask some questions, come off mute or put it on the chat, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, feel free to put things in the chat. I'm looking at that. Come off mute, like Alex said, and just ask one. Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to say as you guys are maybe formulating a question is a lot of questions that I do get about vulnerable trust is like, wait, how vulnerable should I be? And so just to clarify like what that looks like when it comes to building vulnerable trust, it's a lot about being vulnerable in the workplace. So I like to say, hey, it's not a private like therapy group session. And you're like, when you have, the example is it's not someone always like airing their dirty laundry and regularly sharing shortcomings, because that's just really like a competency issue. But when it talks about this vulnerable trust, a lot of it is really just like in the workplace, being pretty raw and open and honest about yeah, like how you're showing up to different things. So hopefully that's a little bit of clarity there. Any questions on, yeah, working genius, whether it's building trust, mastering conflict? I'm hoping that the conflict continuum was helpful, and then yeah, working toward getting to achieving conflict or commitment.
And I see that we have Trina, your hand up. Go ahead. You just came off mute. Go for it.
Yep. Hi, I just had a question about that. There was a long quote that you shared with us, Jacob, and I don't know
Oh,
if that
yes.
was from the Working Genius, or if you could reiterate that quote or put it in the chat or tell me where to find it. I'd love to have more information about that.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, is that when people fail to be honest with one another?
Yes, that
Okay,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
thank
Patrick
you.
Lencioni, The Advantage. Patrick Lencioni, The Advantage. Yeah, great quote. Thanks for asking for that.
Do you want to go? You want to repeat it, Jacob, and I can put it in the chat.
Yeah, it's when people fail to be honest with one another about an issue they disagree on. Their disagreement around that issue festers over time until it transforms into frustration around that person. And so that quote is, oh, it's so good, right? Because it teaches us that we want to disagree with ideas instead of disagree with people.
Yes, I totally didn't get that. I'm a slow typer.
No, my bad. I think I can just paste it
Oh
probably.
yeah, there we go. I got as far as when people fail to be honest with another about an issue with, and then it stopped.
Yeah, no, I'll get
So
it
if you
in
want
there.
to
That's
paste
great.
it.
That's a great point. Any other questions?
All right, I think we are all good here. I think we have something in the Q&A. Help me understand the nuance. When you say that conflict without trust is politics, does that infer that being political about how we work should be avoided? I understand politics to include deciding how we govern our organization, so I'm not sure we should be avoiding it entirely.
Oh man, I don't see this question. It was long. I'm trying to read it.
Here we go. I just put it in the chat.
Oh, nice. Nice. Does that infer that being political about how we work should be avoided? Yeah, I think conflict without trust is politics. It can lead to bureaucracy. Like there's no when obviously I don't know the person who's asking this question what their understanding and how they would define being political, because I think a lot of people's perspective of being political is just being diplomatic and being really really careful and wise and understanding your culture and having institutional knowledge. So when I say politics, what I, just to define that, so that's a fair question. What do I mean when I say politics? Basically, I'm talking about unhealthy, dysfunctional operating of an organization. And so when you have conflict and no trust, it's going to lead to behind the scenes unhealthy manipulative decisions. And so that's why with your team, you want to be able to truly build like a healthy trust and try to move toward building that vulnerable trust, so that you can actually have conflict, because you want, okay, right, you want to keep moving up to commitment and results. And that's not to say that you can have a really unhealthy culture that's still effective. It just means that maybe everyone who works in that environment is miserable. And so what organizational health model does is say, hey, where's my starting point? And how do I actually practice stepping into this like healthy, vulnerable trust so I can move up this pyramid to get effective results in a healthy, while building a healthy environment. So that's a great question. Yeah, I think the politics maybe that you're referencing in sort of a positive way is just like being in the know, having institutional knowledge, operating with a sense of diplomacy. So hopefully I answered that question. I don't know if that was helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jacob, for your time. We really appreciate it. And I know that we have a session starting here at 11, so thank you all for joining us today. And again, look out for those lead nominations as well as staff assembly elections. Hope to see you all soon at a different session. Bye, everyone.